The phone buzzed on the table, a small tremor of light in the dim room. Maya picked it up, her heart already a frantic bird in her chest. She knew who it was. She knew what was coming. The voice on the other end was calm, too calm, a flat line where there used to be warmth. The words were about timing, about distance, about incompatible life paths. But underneath the polite excuses, she heard the real truth. It was the way she laughed too loud, the books she read that he found boring, the quiet way she preferred a night in. She was, in 100 small ways she had tried to fix, simply not enough. The call ended. The silence that followed was heavier than any sound. It was a hollowing out. The desperate, clawing thought arrived immediately. I'll show him. I'll become someone he'll regret losing. It was a fantasy of transformation built on a foundation of shame, a desire to win back the validation that had just been ripped away. Her worth felt like a currency someone else had just declared worthless. So she began. The energy of her hurt was a frantic fuel. She channeled it all outward. Mornings started with punishing workouts. Evenings were spent curating a perfect life on social media, a life of smiling coffee cups and sunset hikes she took alone. She bought new clothes, changed her hair, said yes to every invitation. Every compliment from an acquaintance was a tiny, addictive hit. See, she'd think, I am becoming better. But the high never lasted. It would crash by the end of the day, leaving her more tired than before. The goalpost for enough kept moving. If 10 likes felt good, she needed 20. If one person said she looked great, she needed to hear it from someone more important. She was performing for an invisible audience of one, a ghost she was trying to impress. The comparison became a constant hum in the background of her mind. She was running a race against a memory, on a track that led in circles. The deep fatigue set in, a bone tiredness that had little to do with physical exertion. It was the exhaustion of trying to win a game that had no real prize, only the promise of a next level that was always just out of reach. She was building a house on someone else's land, decorating it with things she thought they would like, and wondering why it never felt like a home. The victory she was chasing was hollow because it was never really about her. It was a reaction, a deflection from the real work that waited patiently within. The breaking point came on a Tuesday. It wasn't dramatic, there was no grand realization. She was simply tired, bone deep, soul weary tired. She had spent the morning scrolling through photos of a friend's engagement, feeling that familiar pang of comparison, and then she'd forced herself to the gym. Standing in front of the mirror, watching her body move through the motions, she saw the effort etched on her face. It wasn't the healthy glow of self-care, it was the strained look of someone trying to earn a love that was no longer on offer. The performance had become its own prison. That evening, she didn't go out. She didn't post anything. She sat on her sofa in the quiet and just let herself feel the exhaustion. For the first time, she didn't try to push it away with another activity or another goal. She just let it be there. And in that quiet, a small, steady thought emerged. What if the way out isn't forward, but inward? It started with a simple decision. Instead of waking up and immediately reaching for her phone to check for validation, she would breathe. Just for 1 minute, she would sit on the edge of her bed, feet flat on the floor, and count her breaths. In for 4, hold for 2, out for 6. The first morning, her mind was a riot of thoughts. You're wasting time. You should be running. He's probably already moved on. She noticed the thoughts, but she didn't obey them. She just returned to her breath. It was a small act, but it felt like claiming a tiny piece of ground for herself. This became the new discipline. She began to notice the critical voice in her head not as a truth teller, but as a habit. When she heard, "You're not trying hard enough," she would pause and ask, "Says who?" She started to find worth in things that left no trace on social media. The satisfaction of finishing a book she loved, for no one but herself. The quiet pride of keeping her space clean, not for guests, but for her own peace. She cooked a meal simply because she was hungry, not because it would make a good photo. The goal shifted. It was no longer about being chosen by someone else. It became about the daily practice of choosing herself. This looked less like a transformation and more like a series of small, steady returns. Some days it was just remembering to drink enough water. Other days it was the courage to say no to an event she didn't want to attend. Each small action was a vote for her own well-being. The frantic energy of the pursuit began to settle into a slower, more reliable rhythm. She was building a foundation, brick by quiet brick, and for the first time, it felt like the ground beneath her was her own. Little by little, the noise of comparison softened. The need for external proof of her worth began to feel like a heavy coat she could finally take off. She wasn't fixed. She still had bad days. But the bad days were different now. They were moments of weather passing through, not a permanent climate. She could feel the sadness or the doubt without letting it define her. The work was internal, unseen, and profoundly real. She was learning, in the smallest of ways, how to be her own home. Months later, she saw him. It was a chance encounter in a grocery store aisle. For a second, the old script tried to run. Her heart jumped, a flash of the old panic, the urge to check her hair, to stand up straighter. But then something remarkable happened. The feeling passed through her like a breeze, and it was gone. She met his eyes and offered a small, polite nod. He looked the same, but the emotional charge was gone. His opinion of her, which had once held the power to build her up or break her down, was now just information. It had no weight. He started to speak, offering the same polite excuses she remembered. But she wasn't really listening. She was observing the moment from a place of deep calm. She noticed the old triggers, the phrases, the tone of voice, but they didn't hook her. They were like familiar landmarks in a country she no longer lived in. She realized the real work hadn't been about changing his mind or even about moving on from him. The real work was building a foundation of self-regard so solid that no external event could shake it. The quiet victory wasn't in his reaction or her lack of one. The victory was in the internal peace she carried with her as she walked away. The victory was in the understanding that she had built something that couldn't be taken away by a rejection, a compliment, or a chance meeting in a store. She had built a home within herself. The walls were made of small, consistent choices to be kind to herself. The roof was the acceptance of her own imperfections. The light inside came from the simple knowledge that her worth was not something to be earned from the outside world, but something to be recognized and tended from within. That foundation was unshakable because it was built on the truth of her own experience, not the fantasy of someone else's approval. The storms of life could rage outside, but inside, there was a steady calm. She had outlasted the rejection not by defeating it, but by building a life so full of her own quiet value that the rejection simply became a small, distant part of her story. It had no power over the person she had chosen to become. That quiet victory is available to you, too. Notice where you seek validation from outside sources. Take one small step today toward trusting your own worth. The most lasting change happens in the quiet moments you choose yourself.